basic scabbard for a sword, and this isn't necessarily authentic, but it does the job and it's close to. And what we're going to try and build is something very similar to mine, which is just plain scabbard with straps and sewn along a fighting edge. There are other ways of doing this, which includes having a hidden bridge, which is a bit of wood the belt can slip through, but it's hidden by the leather. And the other thing is sewing on along the back seam, but this is the way I prefer to do it. So just to give you an idea of the basic construction for you to be able to go and do it yourself. The first step to making our scabbard is to make the wood core. For the wood core, in my opinion, you can use anything, as long as it's a reasonably strong wood. It'll do correctly. I'm using pine boards. I've used pine for my other ones, and it stands up to combat. There's no issues, and probably is a bit too thick, but it gives me a lot of room to work down to the shape that I want. So what we want is two boards that are greater than the length of our blade, and the idea is make sure they have a straight edge, and we're going to place our blade on it with the hilt against the top end of the wood. Then what we want to do is draw the outline of our blade along that wood, like so. What that does is it gives us where the blade is going to fit in to the scabbard or slide in. From that point, we need to figure out an outer edge, a shape for our scabbard. So what we want to do is get a tape measure, or a ruler would be better, and let's see, perhaps 1 centimeter. Draw around the edge of that line that we just made, 1 centimeter out, so it should be an exact copy of what you've just done, but 1 centimeter bigger along all edges. So just mark out 1 centimeter along the various points, and then line them up and draw your outline, and that is going to be the basic outline of your scabbard. So that will look something like this. You can see here the inside of the blade where it slides in, and then the outside of our scabbard. And what we want to do is then cut out that outside line of the scabbard, and that gives us the very first piece, similar to that. So I'm going to go ahead and get the second piece cut out, and then we'll move on to the next stage. So we have our two pieces cut out, and what we're looking to do now is to etch the interior of the scabbard where the blade is going to slide into and sit. There's a few different ways of doing that, which is you could either chisel this out, you can get a sanding band, which is what I used to do, and sand the interior out, or if you have a router, you can router it out, which I've literally just done on this first piece for the first time. And the whole idea is to router it out so that your blade can sit in it. Now, depth wise, so this blade is 1/2 centimeter width. Therefore, in an ideal world, you're wanting 1/4 centimeter depth on each piece. That'll fit the blade. We are going to add a layer of wool to the inside, which is going to take up that little bit more space. So we need to write these out just slightly over the 1/4 centimeter depth until we get a nice fit. And that's a bit of trial and error. It's just a case of writing it out, laying your wool, cutting it, and then clamping it all together and seeing if your sword will draw or not. Trial and error. So, like I say, once you've got your two pieces cut out, route or sand or chisel the interior out to a depth where it's covering half the width or just over half of the width of your blade, and your blade should be able to get in there without any obstacle and just fit nice and snug. So I'm going to go ahead now and get the other side done. So the center of this one is etched out, so we should be able to place our blade in quite nicely. And another wee check we can do is just make sure it slides in and connects. And with our other piece, we should be able to close it. I don't feel very loose, but that's going to be the next step that we're going to work on. So for the next step, we have to go a bit ahead. We have to jump ahead and then come back. So what we're looking to do is treat the inside of our scabbard, and there's a sequence that we're going to do. We're going to put linseed oil on the inside, then we're going to varnish it, and then we're going to glue wool to the inside. But before we do that, we need to know that the sword will fit in with the wool inside, so we have to dry fit it first before we then start to treat the wood. So to do that, we get some plain wool fabric and we lay it along the inside. And I usually find a bit of chalk is the best way of marking out the shape that you need to cut. So make sure it's cut, it covers everything, and then find an edge and literally draw out your shape. I do it in short strokes because if you try doing it in too big a stroke, it'll stretch the wool and actually you'll end up with it being misshaped. So you want to release the pressure. When you reach the mouth of the scabbard where it comes in, give yourself lots of extra surplus because you're going to want to cut that around at the end, so don't worry about cutting it flush with anything. So that's our basic shape. So we'll now get our scissors and cut this out. So we'll cut out the shape, and now we just want to make sure that it fits in. It doesn't need to be pretty, just as long as it covers the inside, and that's good. And like I say, leave plenty at the throat because you want to fold that over. If there's any really big bits that look like they're going to interfere with the other scabbard coming in, then you can trim them there. So we've cut our 2 pieces of wool out. Before we can treat the wood and glue the wool in, we need to know the fit of the blade to make sure it's okay and we don't need to put out anything else. So this is the dry fit. So we'll set our 2 pieces out and we'll set our sword on one in place. And then we'll flip the other one over and on, trying to make sure to keep it on the blade and not interfere with the wood any. So you should feel the wood connect together. Then we're looking to just lightly clamp this, and you're making sure that you're not clamping the blade. You have to clamp the edge wood, otherwise you're going to put pressure on the blade and it'll stick and you'll think it's a lot tighter than what it actually is. When you're dry fitting your blade, what you're looking for is a little bit of resistance so that the sword doesn't fall out of the scabbard, but you're looking at to draw freely when you want it. You also have to bear in mind that as you sand down your scabbard to the shape, it's going to lose some strength and it'll flex a little bit more than what it will do at the minute, depending on what wood you're using. So there's a few different outcomes. The first one is that it works perfectly. Happy days. Second one is that it's too tight. So take your 2 pieces apart, take a skim of wood off, or it can be too loose. So there's a couple things we can do to solve this. So this blade at the minute is perfect. It can't fall out, but it draws nice and easy. And that's for a couple reasons. So if the blade is perfect, or even if it's loose, you can do this. And what it is adding a little bit of wool at the bottom. Now this blade, this scabbard was slightly loose, so I've had to add 2 pieces. But what this also does, as well as bringing it back up to catching the blade, it actually helps stopping the blade fall out. So it's just cutting 1 or 2 extra pieces and putting them at the tip, and that means when you drive your sword home it'll hold, and if it gets tipped upside down it'll still hold. But when you're drawing it, once it gets past that piece of resistance, it'll draw nice and free. So if it's too tight, take a skim off. If it's perfect, dead on, maybe add just one layer of wool at the bottom just to catch the tip. If it's too loose, add a couple layers at the bottom to catch the tip. If you can do it on both sides, all the better. Now that we know that fits, what we're going to do is move on to treating our blade. So we'll move our wool out of the way for now. Once you've dry fitted your blade and you know it's all fitting and it's fine, give your wood a bit of a tidy up. So I've literally just give mine a little bit of a sand down on the inside. Just a wee quick one, just for the drama. Tidied up the mouth a little bit so there's a nice little bit of a curve. And then make sure you've no dust and no sandpaper grit in your wood. What we're going to do is start to treat the blade. So we'll keep the wool out of the way for now. Keep the blade out of the way. We just need these. A good rag and some raw linseed oil or boiled linseed oil. And we're going to give it a generous coat on the inside and along the edges too. And this is going to help protect the wood and keep it in good condition. So just be pretty generous with it. Make sure it really gets a good soaking into the wood. Obviously remember, linseed oil is the rags and all can actually spontaneously combust, so just be careful with this stuff. Once we've got the linseed oil on, the next stage we're going to do is varnish the interior with an outdoor clear varnish. And what that's going to do is that's going to seal in that linseed oil on for the wood, and it's also going to stop any oils from the wood escaping and into the blade. Wood is quite corrosive to metal, so it's something you don't really want your metal touching against the wood all the time. So get a good coat of varnish on, we'll leave that to dry overnight, and then we'll move on to the next step. So the linseed oil and the varnish is dried. Now it's time to line the inside of the scabbard. This would have been done with sheep's wool at the time, which gave off a certain oil that would protect the blade. We're going to do it with wool fabric because trying to put the sheep's wool in, it just comes out too thick. I think it's really hard to do because of the thickness of our blades. So the bit of wool fabric that we put in is going to do grand. We're going to use wood glue and really cover this. Put the wool down, make sure it covers as much as it can. If it comes over the lips, that's okay, because we can trim that down before we put the two pieces together. So here we go. So we'll make sure there's no creases in it, because that'll stop your blade going in easy. And we'll now let that dry, and then we'll come back tomorrow and put the two pieces together, and we'll also sort out the feed throat and just up at the top here, get it glued down and trim anything that needs trimmed. But for now we'll just let that dry in. Our wool is dried, so now we're ready to put these two pieces together. So we want to get some wood glue, and we're going to go around the very edge where the two pieces of wood meet, and it doesn't need to be a lot. And then what we want to do is take our blade and set it on one of the pieces. And put it on. Now, the next bit, you don't want to get a lot of glue over your blade and everything, so you just want to be a bit careful about placing this one on. So do it a wee bit short and then set it home and make sure the wood is connecting and give it a wee squeeze. When you're happy that you've got one of the ends is in a good place, just put a wee clamp on it. You're making sure that it can move at all times, and then make sure the bottom bit is nice and tight. Make sure you can get your blade out, remembering it still will be a bit tight at this stage, and get an R clamp on it. Right, so now what we want to do is start wrapping this, just getting it as tight as we can everywhere, and then make sure our blade can still move out. It will be extremely tight, but you want to just make sure that you can still pull it out. So once you've done that, you want to make sure your blade goes back in, and then pull it back out and wipe any wood glue off it, because you don't want that drying on your blade. Essentially this is wiping off any excess in the interior. And then do it again. And just keep making sure that it can go in okay. Once you know it can, take it back out, give it a wipe again, and then we're going to let that dry. Let it dry for a good day. So our scabbard is dried, Now we can get down to shaping it. So first thing you want to do is get your sword in it. Now, as I said before, the sword is a little bit stiff because of the tightness of the wood, but as we shave down the wood, it will release a little bit more. Also bear in mind the wool inside. So as I said before, at the very tip it's extra thick, which means when you push it in you get that little bit more resistance. You drive it home and it can't fall out. But once you give it a pull, you get a nice free release, and that'll ease a little bit more as the wool wears to the shape of the blade. So what we want to do to start getting this shaped is get your sword in and drive it home. And what we're looking to do now is mark around the hilt on the wood with a pencil, and that's going to give us our shape of our scabbard. So just get the wool out of the way and go around the hilt. Then sword out, put it to the side. Now, there's going to be a lot of wood shavings in this next bit, so this extra little bit of wool that we kept on the top, what we want to do with it is actually just fold it down in there for now. That's going to give us a bit of room to play with, and it's going to stop any wood shavings or dust getting down into the scabbard. So just be careful not to rip it, but you just want it in there, out of the way, and covering that up. And you'll be able to see the shape of our hilt. So that's what we're wanting to remove, is everything outside of that. And what we're going to do first is we're going to work the bit around the hilt. That'll get us our shape, and then we'll continue it on down the rest of the scabbard. So I would normally do this with rasps to begin with, but now that we have the router attachment for the Dremel, I'm actually going to give that a wee go first and just get rid of a good bit of the bulk of the wood before we then go to the rasp. So here we go. So that is the bulk of the wood off. We are just slightly above the top thickness of the scabbard. So what we're going to do next is get the rasps and get the curve in then, and just smooth all this out and put a nice wee shape on it. Once we've done it with the rasps, we'll start going over it with sandpapers as well, just to make it nice and smooth. You need the scabbard to be as smooth as possible before we put the linen on in the next stage. So there's our basic shape rasped out. And now we'll get a bit of sandpaper and start really smoothing this down and get the final shape and any imperfections out. And there we go. The full shape of the scabbard is done. Now that a bit of wood's taken away, it's a bit more freer, it goes home nicely, but still doesn't come out. And we've got a nice smooth surface here, nice rounded edges, nice and even. So what we're going to do now is we're going to treat the outside of this wood the same way we treated the inside, which is we're going to do a linseed oil cover, and then we're going to varnish it, and we're going to leave that to dry overnight and come into the next stage tomorrow. We'll leave that to dry overnight, and then tomorrow we will get into wrapping it with the linen. Now we're going to wrap our scabbard in linen, and this is going to give it a lot of strength, just like the shields. It's going to act like a carbon fiber mesh over everything. So literally wood glue. We've already pre-cut our linen to the shape of the scabbard, and all we're going to do is take a straight edge, put it at the halfway mark of one of the sides, get it down, glue the other side, get it on, and then wrap the final bit over. And what we're wanting to do is trim this little lip as we go then, to make sure that, because that'll go quite solid, you want that to be as flat as possible. Any little things on your linen or where it overlaps will show through on your leather, so you want your linen to be as clear as possible, not even a thread or any dirt, and you want your seam to be as clean as possible so that it has minimum impact on your leather. So we'll just work away at it. There we go. The linen is drying, so we'll let it dry for a good few hours, and then we can start putting on some of our leather lace for the straps, etc., and for decoration. We'll let that dry for now. Our linen wrap is dried. What we're going to do now is start to prepare the suspension for the scabbard. To do that, we have to get some leather thong and place it in the right places around the scabbard to contain the suspension strap once the leather's on. So I've already done one as an example, and you can see what's going to happen is the strap will go around the scabbard and these will hold it from sliding, just like on this scabbard here.
they can't move past that point. The other purpose you can use these for is to put a bit of decoration beneath the leather as well, which we'll do later. The main points to consider whenever you're doing this is where you're going to place these. So I put one right at the hilt because our hilts are considerably heavy, and what you don't want is with your suspension the weight of the hilt pulling the scabbard down and it trying to fall out of the scabbard. So you need one right up to counterbalance the weight, and then you'll place another one or two further down the scabbard, and we'll size them up just like on this one. We've got one near the hilt, one just at the about 2 inches, 3 inches down, and then another one just further back just to secure it from waving about. So we're going to do something very similar here because these two blades aren't that far apart in length. To do it, we'll need leather thong and super glue. So we've already got this one done. We'll move on to the middle one. To do it, get an idea of where roughly you want to place it and cut your thong to length. Get your super glue and quite literally start placing it. The next step is to make sure you have your strap because you need to know the width. And what we're going to do is we'll place it beside whenever we're placing our next one. You want to leave a couple millimeters gap either side to take into account the thickness of the leather that you're going to wrap your scabbard in. So it can't be right up against, it has to have a little bit of space to take that into account. Once that's done, we can then add in some sort of decoration. So on mine, I just went for a simple line between. I added an extra one going round the scabbard, and then I added these ones going up. You can do whatever you want. There's no set rule. It's whatever way you want to do it. And you can also use different thicknesses, etc., to separate it out. So I'm maybe going to do a slightly different thickness now and put some sort of design into it. So there we go, simple decoration with two lines, and I quite like the idea of the tier rune with extenuated down, just also to match the sort of hilt and blade profile. So just make sure everything's nice and secure, let it dry for a wee while, and then we can start wrapping our leather. Now we're ready to put the leather on. There's a couple different ways of doing this, and one of the more authentic ways would be to use hide and to soak it, put it on, and sew it before it dries. However, because I'm using a softer leather, I do mine slightly different. I use glue. So, because I had a bit of an embroidery design on this, I've already started it, and we're just going to continue on from there. So all we need is a bit of wood glue and a clothes peg, and what we're going to do is do it in stages, because what we'll do is we will bring this bit of leather right up to this ridge, get it all glued, flip it over, and then use this to really dig it in. And we need to let that dry before we then work on the opposite side of this ridge. And we just do it in stages so that it's all nice and secure, and it'll add a bit of strength then. So like I said, I've already started, so we're just going to work from here up to this ridge. So we'll let that dry. Once that's set, we can then move on to the next bit. We'll just keep doing that stage by stage until this entire first side of the scabbard is complete.
Once you've finished the front, it's time to move on to the back. So simply turn your scabbard around, start at the bottom, put your glue, and start the clip, and do the exact same thing that you've been doing. The one difference is now we're going to start to secure the leather with a saddle stitch. So you'll get 2 leather needles, waxed leather thread, and you'll start at the bottom and start to work your way up as you're gluing and securing the leather. Once you're ready, trim your leather, make sure it's glued together, and get a leather sanding file and sand it nice and smooth to make your seam just a nice edge. So I was a bit pushed for time and had to push on with this. And I just want to add in this little bit to explain something. Once you've sewn, you've glued your leather and you've sewn along the seam and you reach this top bit, what I tend to do is start to trim the excess and start to super glue it one piece at a time, flat, and then cut off, super glue another wee bit, and just start to get it shaped. And then any excess should be cut off here and should be cut out of here. And you can see even more so where I would have had a little lip come out over this. I just trim that down again, and then I get the leather sanding file and just tidy it up as best I can. So it's just a nice wee way of tidying up the mouth guard. Okay, so I just want to go over the suspension. I had to go to an event and I was pushed for time, so I had to go ahead and do it, but it's pretty simple anyway, and probably easier to have it done and explain it. So as we said before, we've done 3 straps for holding the suspension. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, and these are just simple leather loops around an O-ring and sewn into place just there. And it can be just a wee simple stitch just to keep it in place. So we have 3 of these, and as you can see, it's small, medium, large. This is so that the scabbard will hang at an angle whenever it's on you, and keep the hilt up towards the hand. So these 3 all go to this larger O-ring then. And what we have is the 3 ones going to the scabbard. We have what is a belt cut at the right place so that this buckle sits on the chest, and this belt goes up and over your head onto your opposite shoulder, and I'll get a wee photo of how to wear it. And then we have another belt cut in half that is for the waist, and that's it. It's simple suspension and it works for me. So 3 smaller O-rings, 1 larger O-ring, 2 belts, and an extra belt strap that goes to creating these 3 suspension straps and these 3 that go around the scabbard. So here's our suspension ready to go on. The bit that I said that goes over your head and on the opposite shoulder goes on first. Hang it into place, and the belt then comes round and straps in. This one isn't sized for me, this is sized for somebody else. So ideally you'd want that a little bit higher and this round a bit more, but because the person that it's made for is slightly bigger than me, I needed to give it a bit more of a drop. So, but that's it. There's your 3 suspension and the angle. Ready to go.